Okay, so we're going to take a look at how to find the slope whenever you don't have a graph. And so, like we've been saying, finding slope always goes in between 2 points. Well, in this case, we don't have our graph, but they did give us our points. You could always go and graph these 2 points and then do rise over run. It would be a lot of work when we have something that we can do that's even easier, and that's use the slope formula. You can see the slope formula up there, and it is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And you can see once again, slope is always a fraction, and our formula is a fraction itself. So the first thing that I always like to tell my kids whenever they are trying to find the slope is they have to label their points. I always tell them that it's the hardest part to doing slope is labeling the points. And once you do that, the rest of this is pretty easy. So we're going to start with our first point, number 1, and 3, -5. Now, whenever you look at 3, -5, the 3 represents the x coordinate, and the -5, sorry, represents the y coordinate. Now, kids sometimes get confused which is x, which is y. Now, the way that I remember it is it's just like the alphabet. X always comes first. So what we do is we take that 3 and we label it x1. We take that -5 and we label it y1. And then we look over our second point. Well, the ones that I just labeled, the x1 and y1, tell me that that was my first point. So now I go over to my second point, and because it's the second point, it becomes x2, y2. Now, once I have these labeled, I'm simply going to plug it into my slope formula. And so my slope formula says y2. Well, when I look at this, y2 is -6. Then the formula says minus. Now, you always have to put that minus sign. Then when I look at y1 is -5. And like I said, you have to have both the minus and the negative for the -5. Both of them are required. Over, and then we look at the bottom and it says x2. Well, my x2 is -7. Minus. Once again, it has to be a minus. And then x1 is 3. Okay, so we're going to work this out, and once we work this out, we should have what our slope is. We have minus a negative on the top, so I'm going to turn that into plus a positive, and -6 plus 5 is -1. Then on the bottom, we have -7 minus 3, and because it's a -7 and a -3, we add those, and we keep the sign, and this is -10. So my fraction is -1 over -10, but 2 negatives make a positive. So this actually reduces, and my final answer is just going to be 1 over 10. The slope in between 3, -5 and -7, -6 is going to be 1 over 10. Okay, so let's go over to number 2. Once again, we are going to label this x1, y1, x2, y2. We'll start off, we're going to plug this into the slope formula again. So we'll start off with y2. So -9 minus, and then y1 is 2, over, and x2 is 1, minus x1 is -5. We have minus a negative on the bottom, so we turn that to plus a positive, and then we work this out again. So -9 minus 2 would come out to be -11, over, and 1 plus 5 is 6. -11 over 6 does not reduce, so my final answer is -11 over 6, and that describes the slope in between -5, 2 and 1, -9. Once again, if you were to actually plot these points on graph paper and do rise over run, you would get the same answer. Okay, taking a look at 3 and 4, and 3 and 4 are both going to be special. One of the ways that I can tell that they're already going to be special is that both the y coordinates have 7, and then over here both the x coordinates have -9. So that kind of lets me know that they're going to be special. Now, you may not recognize that, and that's fine. It's not required. But it does tell me that they're going to be special slopes. So we're going to go ahead and label these x1, y1, x2, y2. And we'll plug these into the slope formula. So we'll go 7 minus 7 over, and x2 is 3 minus negative 5. Down on the bottom, minus the negative turns into plus a positive, and 7 minus 7 on top is 0 over 8. Now, 0 divided by 8 is 0. And if you remember, we had 4 types of slope, and there were 2 special ones. 0 was the one that we could drive on. So when we put this into the calculator and we get 0, or if we just work it out like we did there and we get 0, we know that this is a special line. It has to be a horizontal line. Taking a look at number 4, we label this x1, y1, x2, y2. So we're going to plug this into the slope formula, and y2 is negative 1 minus y1, which is 6, over x2, which is negative 9, minus x1, which is negative 9. Now on the bottom, minus negative turns into plus a positive, and we get negative 7 on top over 0. Now, anytime that you have 0 in the denominator, you're actually not allowed to have a 0 in the denominator. And so this one right here is called undefined. Undefined. And if you remember, undefined is the slope that was vertical. This was the one that you could not drive on. So anytime that you work this out and you get a 0 in the denominator, the answer is undefined, and you know this is a vertical line. Now, if you put this into the calculator, it will say divide by 0 error. If you ever get that message, what the calculator is telling you is that you have an undefined slope. So if you ever stick the problem that we just did into the calculator and it says divide by 0 error, then you know that that's undefined. Now if you stick it into the calculator on number 3 and it just says 0, then you know you have a 0 slope. So you can take a look at these 4 problems and see how that we can plug this into the slope formula and still get our slope. Slope is very important because slope is how we graph lines, and slope is also how we write equations. So what we did here is something that is a big part of what we do throughout the rest of algebra.